If you're looking for a work truck that's a bit easier to park, or you just don't want to spend that much money on your next Tacoma, don't worry, they have your back with the 2025 Toyota Tacoma SR. This is effectively the base trim, although this model has just a few options on it. Let's take a look around and see why you might want to get this one, or why you might want to upgrade to the SR5. This SR5 started at $34,800. The base price of the Tacoma has gone up in this generation. You could get one a little bit less expensive than this, but this is the 4x4 model, so the two-wheel drive model is going to be about $2,000 less expensive. Oddly enough, you don't actually get that much of an exterior change because Toyota decided to give us body color bumpers in all the trims. That's a really nice touch, so it doesn't make this feel as bargain basement as some manufacturers do. Down here at the bottom, we do get blanked off sections for the fog lights. That's where they would have gone. Parking sensors right there in this model, and still the absolutely enormous air dam down there at the bottom. I mean, it's got to be about 6 inches tall. That obviously helps improve fuel economy, something you're definitely going to notice in this Tacoma, they say, especially in highway driving versus the outgoing model. We have a radar sensor there in all trims because the Toyota Safety Sense system is standard. That includes adaptive cruise control, the autonomous emergency braking. Those things are all standard in every trim, as are these full LED headlights. So that's another nice touch that you don't have to step up the ladder for. On the other hand, if you want some of the more advanced features like the big light bar, if you want the fog lights, you're going to have to pay extra for those in the upper end trims. If you want something other than steel wheels, obviously you're going to have to work your way up the ladder as well. Personally, I like that look. I'm glad that Toyota decided to keep that. This generation is going to offer two different cab treatments. You can choose the two-door cab. Yes, this is a two-door, so there's no tiny door or anything like that back here, or the four-door, which is going to be the more popular version. There are also two beds behind, 5-foot bed or a 6-foot bed, and two different rear suspensions. The SR trim is going to get leaf springs in the back. It's the only model to get that. Coil springs are going to give you a better ride out on the open highway, on an off-road trail, etc. But if you want the durability and dependability and that particular leaf spring feel when you have a lot of weight in the back, you're going to want the SR trim. And that's why this is a bit more work truck focused. Out back, we have basically the same taillights that we find in the rest of the Tacoma lineup, obviously without the power tailgate release right there. Basically the same tailgate as well. Tacoma spelled out nice and big across the bottom. Little Toyota spelled out right there on the release for the tailgate. Camera right there on that side, shining down there at the hitch receiver. This one has an optional hitch receiver. Standard towing on the SR trim is just 3,500 pounds. So that is something that you're going to have to consider. This one has the optional receiver package with the 4 and 7 pin wiring harness connections. Tacoma will top out at 6,500 pounds of towing capability when properly equipped. Some models will drop down to 64, and if you get the upcoming hybrid model, it's going to drop all the way down to 6,000. Now, the tailgate is not damped, but it is pretty light, and that's thanks to the composite bed inside. This is something we've seen from Toyota for a while. It's continuing here in the Tacoma. This means that if you are pretty hard on your bed, you don't have to pay extra for a bed liner. You just toss your stuff in there. If it scrapes up the bed, no problem. It's not going to rust. I do wish it was damped, but on the other hand, it's, again, a pretty light tailgate. Although the trim in the SR is a little bit different than the rest of the lineup, I think, again, Toyota has done a really good job making this feel not like the bargain basement, absolutely stripped to the bones model. We still have parking sensors in this particular trim. Keep in mind, this truck is not a base one. It does have just a few option boxes ticked. Every Tacoma is going to have a 2.4-liter turbocharged engine under the hood. This has been a little bit controversial, especially in some traditionalist circles, because they really wanted a naturally aspirated V6 or something like that under here. I think it was the right way to go. More importantly, though, there are going to be different power levels depending on the trim you get, and the SR trim is going to be the least powerful. 228 horsepower, 243 pound-feet of torque with the automatic transmission. That is an important thing to know. If you get the manual transmission, you get a pretty significant power bump. 270 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque. And that power output applies to every Tacoma regardless of trim where the manual transmission is offered. The other Tacomas with the automatic transmission go even further up to 278 horsepower, 317 pound-feet of torque. So if you're looking at those trims, opting for the manual actually gives you a bit of a power reduction. You also get a slightly different red line, which is a little bit interesting. The more important thing I think for SR shoppers is that this engine has a lot of low-end torque. It's going to produce its peak torque just over 1,500 RPM, and that makes a big difference when you're towing or you're hauling, or you're just driving around town and you don't want to have to shift that manual transmission. So Personally, I would much rather have this engine than a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine like we used to find in the Tacoma. Now let's check out the interior of the SR, because there's some solid reasons you might want to get this for your next work truck. Helping me out here is Travis. Over here we have the front passenger seat folded. You can see we have these bolt attachment points for various accessories that you could dock or lock into that passenger seat. It folds forward, so you get a little bit more storage room right there. And then you could tuck stuff behind, but he's going to grab this bag out of there, and you can see that rather unfortunately you do have to lift it up over the seat and then out of the vehicle. So that is kind of a bummer if you are planning on moving cargo around. Also, the driver's seat, it tilts and slides more like a 2 or 3 row crossover with accessibility for the back, so we don't get that same fold flat like ability over here to get cargo in and out. In the back you can see that we have some random stuff that I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Travis over here. We got some tripods, some GoPros, things like that. And we can see the rest of the feature set back here. Behind the driver's seat we have, I guess, what would be a footwell if there was a rear seat. Where that rear seat might ostensibly go, we have a lockable tool storage area. You can also put laptop bags, computer bags, things like that back there. And then there is a top section right here with a little bit of a ridge to keep things from rolling off. There are also storage areas on either side. There's one over there on the driver's side. There's also one over there on the passenger side. And now, Travis, show us what's behind that Tacoma backing. So we have even more storage back there and pegboard holes, which is kind of an interesting twist. So you can hang your tools and things like that. And then when this is down, you can also use this as another tier of storage. So you can keep stuff a little bit hidden out of the way in that little compartment under there, and then have that upper layer of storage. But if you lift that one back up into place, we have yet another storage area over here on the passenger side. That one is lockable with those little locks, but not with the key, of course. That's where we're going to find the tire iron and the jack there. We also have a second set of cup holders right here because we have basically the same center console as the 4-door model. So we have those cup holders for the rear passengers, only the driver and the front passenger get to benefit from it. Size-wise, this 22-inch roller bag should give you a bit of an idea of how much cargo you could put back here. You could definitely put at least 2 of those roller bags across on this level of storage. In case you're wondering, you can still install a child seat up front. That's where the top tether anchor is located, right back there. Go ahead and flip that seat up, Travis. Let's see how that would go. So you actually have to pull the lever, then the seat folds up like that. The top tether anchor would then go through that center section of the seat right there just under the headrest, but there are no latch anchors for that front seat. You would have to use the shoulder belt. Also kind of an interesting twist, I have not seen any way to disable the front airbag in this vehicle. I'm waiting for an answer from Toyota on that front, so definitely something to keep in mind if you do plan on getting something like this and you do have to worry about moving a child around. Going in for a closer look at the seats, you can see that we have relatively similar fabric to the rest of the Tacoma lineup. I really appreciate the fact that Toyota didn't decont this interior extremely for this version. So obviously there are going to be fewer things in here than you'll find in the rest of the Tacoma lineup, but it wasn't an extreme content reduction. And that's something that we see in some of the competition and we used to see in the Tacoma as well. This model is not a final production version, so these plastics are not finished. They're actually really smooth. There's supposed to be a texture applied to them, probably pretty similar to what's over here on the glove box, but it wasn't ready yet. Up here we have the 2-tiered dash, but it's all hard plastic, just as you'd expect, all the way across the dashboard. And we have a smaller touchscreen here than you'll find in most of the other trims of Tacoma. This is approximately 8 inches, but it is running the newer infotainment software from Toyota. So the functionality as far as wireless Android Auto and wireless CarPlay, that's basically the same. We have manual climate controls here with very similar toggles and a smaller display. We have places where you could put your cell phone. These are not wireless charging mats, but they are just cell phone storage locations, I guess you could say. Over here we have 2 high-power USB-C ports. They'll put out 52 watts together. We have a 12-volt power port, a place where you could put your tablet computer or your smartphone. It is worth noting that the smartphone integration USB port is actually up here on the side of the screen. Kind of a weird location if you ask me, and that means you probably are going to end up putting your cell phone over there. Now coming back to the center console, we have a pretty traditional shifter, the control for the 4-wheel drive system if you have that equipped, a bunch of button blanks because this one doesn't have any of those options, 2 big cup holders there, and then a reasonable storage area behind, kind of a rubbery lid on top of that, just as you'd expect. Over here on the driver's side, we find basically the same steering wheel as the rest of the Tacoma lineup, only this is a urethane wheel. It's not going to be leather wrapped. But the buttons and functionality, they're basically the same. These control the multifunction LCD. Over here we have the controls for the standard adaptive cruise control and some infotainment buttons. And then on the middle there, we have the partial LCD instrument cluster with LED gauges on each side. If you get the upper end trims of Tacoma, then you do get a full 12.3-inch LCD cluster, but actually I'm okay with this smaller display because again, it's running the same software as the bigger display, just like that one over there. As you'd expect, the seats are manual, but the driver does get a power adjustable lumbar support. All right, let's get the SR out on the road. Acceleration obviously is going to be a bit slower than the other versions, but it's definitely better than it used to be in the Tacoma. The old Tacoma with the 4-cylinder engine was, let's be honest, kind of a slug. And that 2.7-liter engine felt a little rough around the edges. This has kind of a gruff sound to it, but interestingly, especially with the automatic transmission where it will actually rev a little bit higher than in the manual, this has more of a refined 4-cylinder kind of sound. I never really cared for the 6-cylinder tune that we find in the current Tacoma, but if you like 6-cylinder sounds, obviously this is not going to do it for you. And you are going to hear a little bit more of the engine noise coming into the cabin than some folks might like. Although every version of the Tacoma features active noise cancellation to try and help cancel some of that down a little bit. If you want more power, but not necessarily faster acceleration, you could get the manual transmission. 270 horsepower. Interesting twist, if you get the manual, the engine doesn't rev up as high. This one has a red line at 6,200 RPM approximately. It's 1,000 RPM lower with the manual transmission, and I haven't been able to get a good explanation as to why that is. We do have a sport mode over here, but it's not a true manual mode. You can't just say command 8th gear and then floor it and stay in 8th gear. It will actually downshift whenever it wants to. Aside from that, the big thing you're going to notice out on the road is the leaf spring setup in the rear. Out on this road, the suspension feels much firmer and certainly more bouncy in the back than the rest of the Tacoma lineup. And that's just as you'd expect with a less elegant rear suspension. Remember, it is still a live axle in every version of the Taco, but the other trims get a little bit more polished, I guess you could say, with the coil springs in the back. There's a reason that regular cars don't use leaf springs anymore. They're just simply not as elegant as a coil spring as far as really quelling suspension motions, making things move exactly how you want them to. Leaf springs, on the other hand, are relatively inexpensive and they perform pretty well under load. So if you do plan on putting 800 or 900 pounds in the back of your Tacoma and driving it around all day long, you might want to get the leaf springs. Just keep in mind there is a penalty to be paid for buying the least expensive version of the Tacoma if you don't plan on doing a lot of towing or hauling. Speaking of towing, that's another reason again that you might want to work your way up the ladder, because base towing capability in the SR model comes in at 3,500 pounds, mainly due to the reduced power from the engine and some other tweaks and changes here and there. Also, this model does not come standard with the tow hitch in the back. You do have to select that as an option if you want it. Of course, it's going to cost you a little bit more. I really appreciate the fact that Toyota has given us a lot of active safety tech standard on this model. So we have the lane keeping assistance system, adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking, pre-collision warning, all of that is standard. Now there are additional safety features if you want to add them to your Tacoma, but you do have to add those yourself, or you're going to have to work up the trim ladder to a different trim. If you're looking for a better riding mid-size truck, there are a few options out there. Some of them are going to have Toyota logos on them even. If you get the coil springs, it's going to ride better. If you get the adaptive suspension system, the Tacoma's going to ride better. You could also look at something like a Jeep Gladiator that has a decent highway ride to it, or a Honda Ridgeline, which I think has the best ride in this segment. On the other hand, the Ridgeline is pretty expensive. It's just about $40,000 starting. It does start with 4-wheel drive standard, and that is optional on the Tacoma, and the interior is a little bit nicer in some areas than the Tacoma is, but oddly enough, even this base Tacoma feels a little bit more modern than the Ridgeline. As far as fuel economy goes, the Tacoma is currently rated for 20 to 23 miles per gallon, depending on which trim and power output level of this 2.4-liter turbo you get. The SR trim is one of the more efficient trims, but clearly if fuel economy is of a concern, you're going to want either the rear-wheel drive model, or you might want to spend even more and get the upcoming Hybrid Max. Just know that those models are going to be an awful lot more expensive. Now, speaking of the Hybrid Max system, if you want to know about that, you're going to have to wait until spring of 2024, because Toyota did not have any of those models available for us to test out here. So be sure and stay tuned. Videos on that, they're coming up soon. Also coming up soon would be official drive scores and cabin noise scores for the Tacoma. I haven't been able to do any cabin noise testing out here, but anecdotally this does appear a little bit quieter than the previous generations of the Tacoma. Also, the seating position is a little bit more comfortable, and that's probably the biggest thing for me, is that even though the body is not that much taller, they have improved the seating position for the driver to make it more comfortable for taller people or people with longer legs. Those are definitely critical things. On the cabin noise front, we do get some turbo whistle coming into the cabin, and your mileage will vary there. Either you like it or you don't. Personally, I don't really mind it. Be sure and sound off in the comment section. Let me know what you think of the new Tacoma, especially this SR trim. Are you interested in the Tacoma, and are you interested in this not quite bare bones, but definitely maybe more work-focused truck? Are you interested in the fact that it only has 2 seats? So if you only have 2 people, you can be in a 3-person carpool lane in a lot of places. It also has that extra work truck functionality and the extra storage space in the back. But I really wish it had another door here, because getting stuff in and out of the SR trim with this XtraCab back here, it's kind of a pain. You have to get things up and over the seats. You're gonna end up scratching them, getting them dirty, etc. But other than that, I love the format of the SR. The price tag, that is a little bit trickier because it got significantly more expensive. This starts at $31,800 now. That's more than a $2,000 price increase over last year. And as equipped here, this one started at $34,800. It has just a few options on it. They haven't told us how much they cost, but I guess this one is going to be over about $36,000. Plus, of course, the destination charge and tax, title, license, etc. But if you're looking for an SR trim with the optional tow hitch receiver and the wiring harness, then this is probably the model that I would get exactly. In some circles, this 2.4-liter turbo has been pretty controversial. I know a lot of Toyota traditionalists are just not interested in a turbocharged engine. But with only 228 horsepower out of 2.4 liters, this is a very low-stressed turbocharged engine. And remember, this model was designed for over 270 horsepower and well over 300 pound-feet of torque. So as far as engines being stressed, this is not one of them, and there are naturally aspirated engines that could give you 228 horsepower. The turbocharger is here in this trim to give it a lot of low-end torque. 243 pound-feet of torque happens at very low RPMs. So for drivability, livability, towing, and hauling, you definitely want the turbo rather than a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. And that's why, even in this work truck form, I really don't mind the 2.4-liter turbo, and I think it was the right direction for them to go in. Also, parts commonality is very, very high between this and the rest of the lineup. As far as we can determine, it seems to just be a software difference between the 228 horsepower and the 278 horsepower model. So again, a lot less stress on the engine internals and a lot of parts commonality. So when you go to the store, you're going to be able to find the parts to repair your engine yourself. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And again, are you bothered by the 2.4-liter turbo? If I were shopping for a truck in this segment, I have to admit the Tacoma is a really attractive option. We get a lot of standard equipment. All the active safety stuff is standard here. You can get the manual transmission, and I think that's exactly how I would do it. I do wish that there was an option to swap in the coil springs in the SR trim, because I would like the manual and this body format with coil springs. I think that would be a great fit. Let me know what you think about that. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, all those other social places. I'll see all of you next week.